fades in on a dimly lit room. A man in his 30s, clean-shaven, wearing a bloodied white shirt, sits tied to a chair. His name is Alonso, once a trusted lieutenant, now betrayed by the very cartel he served. His breathing is ragged. In the shadows, footsteps echo. A voice, calm but venomous, whispers, "Traitors don't get second chances." This is the story of the accountant. Picture this. A man sits in a dimly lit office, counting money. Stacks of pesos, dollars, and euros tower over the desk, like walls closing in. He adjusts his glasses, scribbles figures in a neat ledger, and forces a smile that doesn't quite reach his eyes. That man was Alonso Lopez. And while he looked calm, inside, he was terrified. See, Alonso wasn't a sicario. He wasn't a street dealer. He was the accountant for one of Mexico's most feared cartels. His world wasn't bullets and blood. It was numbers, wire transfers, offshore accounts. He believed that made him untouchable, that the violence would never seep into his corner. But in cartel life, nobody is untouchable, not even the man who balances the books. Alonso started small. After college, he took jobs at a mid-sized accounting firm. The money was steady but uninspiring. Then, one client introduced him to a businessman who needed help organizing his finances. That businessman drove luxury cars, wore diamond watches, and carried more cash in his pocket than Alonso made in a month. And with one meeting, temptation set its hooks. Within months, Alonso was managing finances for a regional Zetas boss. The work was simple. Move money, clean it, make it look legitimate. The rewards were massive. Vacations abroad, designer suits, a house that made his old life look like a memory. He told himself he wasn't really part of the cartel, just a contractor, a numbers guy. As long as he kept his head down, he'd be fine. And for years, he was. But the higher you climb, the thinner the air gets. By 2011, the Zetas were under immense pressure. Raids, rival ambushes, government crackdowns. Money had to flow clean, fast, and untraceable. Mistakes weren't tolerated. That's when Alonso started noticing discrepancies. Offshore accounts weren't balancing. Funds went missing. He suspected someone was skimming, but accusing the wrong man was suicide. So he stayed quiet. Big mistake. Because soon, the bosses started asking questions. And when millions disappear, guilt doesn't matter. Somebody has to bleed for it. At first, it was subtle. Meetings that used to be friendly turned cold. Armed men started showing up at his office, standing in the corner, silent. Alonso's hands trembled as he counted bills, sweat dripping onto the ledgers. He reassured himself, "They need me. I'm the only one who understands these numbers." But paranoia has a way of being right. One night, Alonso left his office late. The streets were empty. That's when the SUV pulled up. Doors slammed. A bag went over his head. And just like that, the numbers man was off the books. When the hood came off, he was in a warehouse. Concrete floors, chains hanging from the ceiling, cameras aimed like executioners. In front of him sat the cartel boss he once toasted drinks with. Now, the smile was cold. "You think we don't know?" the boss said. "You think we're stupid," Alonso begged. Swore he hadn't taken a cent. Swore on everything he had left. But in the cartel world, begging isn't a defense. It's just part of the show. Alonso's last night wasn't marked by a single gunshot. His former brothers-in-arms wanted a message. They dragged him to an abandoned ranch house on the outskirts of Guadalajara. The air reeked of gasoline and rot. Alonso, bruised and bloodied, was tied to a wooden chair in the center of the room. The betrayal wasn't just about killing him. It was about breaking him down piece by piece, First, they took a hammer to his hands. One by one, his fingers shattered, knuckles splitting open like ripe fruit. Alonso gritted his teeth, blood running down his wrists as he refused to give them the satisfaction of a scream. Then came the machete. Not swift, not clean. Each swing was clumsy, deliberate, dragging out the moment as blood sprayed across the cracked walls. When it was over, they left what was left of him in the middle of the ranch floor, mutilated beyond recognition. His body wasn't just dumped, it was staged. A message to anyone foolish enough to imagine loyalty would protect them. We're in a warehouse. Two cousins, Héctor and Víctor, kneel on a cold concrete floor. A single bulb sways above them. One clenches his jaw in defiance, the other sobs uncontrollably. The sound of a chainsaw sputters, coughs, then roars to life. Their fates are sealed. Two different men, two different betrayals, but the same brutal truth. In the world of cartel bosses, loyalty means nothing, and death is always theater. The chainsaw roared to life, sputtering before screaming in a steady growl. Its metallic echo bounced off the concrete walls of a warehouse. Two young men knelt on the floor, wrists tied behind their backs. Héctor's head stayed high, jaw locked in silent defiance. Víctor couldn't stop shaking, lips quivering around prayers that dissolved into sobs. The camera was rolling. Masked men stood in the shadows, and both cousins knew. This wasn't just execution. This was theater. Héctor and Víctor grew up like brothers in Michoacán. They were only a year apart in age, and since childhood, their lives were interwoven. Soccer in dusty fields, fishing in shallow rivers, sneaking sips of mezcal during village fiestas. Everyone who knew them said the same thing. Where one went, the other followed. But they were different. Héctor was bold, loud, and reckless. The kind of kid who picked fights twice his size and laughed about it later. Víctor was quieter, more cautious, always playing catch-up, always trusting his cousin's lead. By their late teens, poverty was closing in. The little work they found barely paid for tortillas. And in Michoacán, when the local cartels offer money, you don't say no. Not if you want to eat, not if you want to live. Their entry into cartel work was small. Errands, deliveries, driving old pickups stacked with boxes they were told not to open. It didn't feel dangerous, at least not at first. They weren't gunmen, they weren't killers. They told themselves they weren't really part of it. Just couriers, just drivers. But in cartel Mexico, just is an illusion. By 2006, the war between the Gulf Cartel and Los Zetas tore the country apart. Ambushes, massacres, streets painted red. Trust evaporated. Suddenly, suspicion was more dangerous than proof. And someone, somewhere, whispered that Héctor and Víctor were leaking information. Maybe they weren't. Maybe they were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. But the cartel doesn't need evidence. Paranoia alone kills. The night it happened, an SUV rolled into their street. Neighbors saw men with rifles, heard the boots pounding on concrete. But in cartel territory, you don't call the police. You don't interfere. You shut your door and pray it isn't you. Víctor begged as they were dragged out, insisting they'd never betrayed anyone. Héctor spit in the face of one of the gunmen, cursing them even as the butt of a rifle cracked against his jaw. They were shoved into the back of the SUV, black hoods pulled over their heads. The ride was silent except for Víctor's muffled crying and Héctor's labored breathing. When the hoods came off, they were in the warehouse, concrete walls stained with old blood, a single light bulb swinging from above, a camera on a tripod aimed directly at them. On the floor, a chainsaw waited. Cartel executions are never just about death. They're about the message, and this one would be broadcast. Héctor tried to glare at his captors, his jaw still tight even through split lips. Víctor broke completely, tears soaking his face as he begged God for mercy. And then the chainsaw roared. It sputtered at first, like a predator waking, before screaming into full power. The masked men closed in. Víctor's prayers cut short in a gurgle. Héctor's defiance vanished in one strangled scream. What happened next was recorded, spread through cell phones, forums, newsrooms. It wasn't execution. It was spectacle. Blood sprayed across concrete, limbs jerking, until silence filled the room. The cousins, once inseparable in life, shared the same end, mutilated in front of a lens, transformed from young men into a warning carved in blood. For their families, there were no bodies to bury, no final goodbyes. A nightmare of knowing and seeing how it ended. For Mexico, it marked a turning point when cartels learned that horror itself could be a weapon.